going on, everyone? Welcome to another episode of the Colonel Panic Podcast. I'm your host, Dave.
I'm Jeff.
We did it, Jeff.
I know.
This is the took us 14 episodes, and we finally got the intro. Nailed it. And today we're talking to Chris.
Hi.
We've known Chris for, I wouldn't say quite some time, but
It's like a year.
it's getting there.
It's really only been a year.
It's like a year and a half.
No, it's more than that.
It's not very long.
The three of us worked together. Chris was our manager, and we were his little minions. We did his bidding, and now we've all gone our separate ways in the meantime.
Some of us forced.
Yes.
Some of us were forced.
Forced to go separate ways.
All of us, more or less, were forced.
In the end,
Yeah.
it went fairly quickly, where we all ended up in different places.
Yeah.
We could have. Me and you could have stayed.
Yeah, I mean, that would have been terrible. I don't know.
So that's actually interesting. I have been fired once. Damn.
Have you?
Just the once for me.
Yeah.
I was laid off once at a carpet store.
I've been laid off once and fired once. So we worked for a company that I think the best way to put it is that I had a fair amount of disagreement about the best way to approach the problems that we had. And every single time we disagreed about those problems, they got a little bit persnickety with me. And then eventually they decided, after I told them that I had spoken to a few people about the situation, they felt like I was trashing their reputation, which, I'm not going to name them and further trash their reputation. And that was kind of the final straw.
So you talked to people outside of the company before?
I did.
Oh, okay.
I talked to some people who I considered mentors. So Yeah, so I wanted to get their input about the situation that I felt I was in with the company and with the senior and executive management.
Mm-hmm.
And I just, I outlined what, obviously it's biased from my point of view, but I outlined what I felt was the proper approach to certain things. And then I outlined what their approach was and about how we were at, loggerheads about that.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, most of the people I spoke to, all of the people I spoke to, were a little surprised by some of the decisions that were being made. Mm-hmm. And, I mentioned this as in one of my one-on-ones with one of the people that I reported to. Mm-hmm. And that person didn't like the fact that I had spoken to somebody else and asked their opinion, and decided that I was therefore going to trash their reputation in the tech industry in Boston.
Oh, wow.
And that was the final straw. So
that brings up an interesting thing. So I don't know if you heard the whole the recruiter. Oh, no, you did. I've told you about the recruiter story. I haven't talked about it on the podcast.
Right.
But so do you think like the tech world in cities is actually like that connected?
Sometimes, so companies, and that includes recruiters, have reputations in the industry.
Right.
Typically, those reputations are tied to the manner in which the people that either are their customers or the people who work for them behave. Mm-hmm. In your case, you and I talked about this. The recruiter in question had some questionable behavior. And that type of behavior typically doesn't serve them well.
Right.
As a hiring manager, which I have been for a while now,
mm-hmm.
That type of behavior means that I don't want to work with a company like that.
Right.
There is, every recruiting agency has a vested interest in making sure that the people that they are working with and trying to place, that those people get placed through them. Mm-hmm. And they want that to happen.
Right.
And when there is any type of monkey wrench thrown into that situation, they can freak out a little bit. But there's freaking out a little bit, and then there's behaving in an extremely unprofessional manner.
Right.
And when you behave in an extremely unprofessional manner, no one involved wants to work with you.
Right.
So, in the case that you're talking about, mm-hmm. that recruiter is somebody who will burn a lot of bridges by behaving that way. They are not, a recruiter is never going to tarnish the reputation of a technical worker.
Right.
Because the recruiters, and I it's a valued skill set, and
Don't worry, I don't think a lot of recruiters listen to this podcast.
No, I'm not worried about that. I've worked with good recruiters and I've worked with bad recruiters, and in this industry you need to work with recruiters, particularly when you're hiring, because there's not enough people who work in tech who have who are talented or who have experience, and so sometimes you need to go through a recruiter to find people.
Right.
When those recruiters behave in a fashion that's particularly negative, though, you don't want to work with them anymore,
Right.
because you can't trust that they're going to be telling you the truth the whole time.
Right.
Recruiters are. Everybody knows that recruiters are there to get a person placed.
Right.
Yeah.
They're less concerned about placing the right person. They're more concerned about getting their fee.
Yeah.
And so if a recruiter trashes an individual, you can be pretty sure that the only reason they would trash that individual is because somehow they feel that individual cost them a fee.
Right.
And that's not something anybody who's a hiring manager gives a shit about.
Right.
Like, I want to make sure I just hire good people. I don't really care whether or not, some recruiter got paid because I hired you.
Right.
While we're on the subject of recruiters, I think it's something that we've talked about on this podcast, actually, in one of the first episodes, from the perspective of like an individual contributor, an engineer trying to get hired at a company that's going to be a good fit. And we've kind of talked about the, if not necessity, the sort of like big advantage that recruiters give you, but also the things you got to watch out for, the cost that might be associated with that. We can pause, it's fine.
Okay, so recruiters, when they're talking to hiring managers, they're very rarely talking about salary. They will try to negotiate on your behalf. Like it's in their best interests that you guys make as much money as possible, because their fee is based upon that. So they generally take a percentage as a fee of whatever salary ends up being negotiated. So say let's go with $100,000 because it's a nice round number, right? Typically it can be 25%, it can be 30%, 33%, that kind of thing. So if they negotiate you $150,000 as opposed to $100,000, they're making substantially more money. So they are working on your behalf in that sense. However, they will not push too hard because they want to get the fee, regardless of what it is.
Better
More
get a slightly lower fee with a higher percentage than
Not get anything.
than not get anything at all. That's exactly right. So you do have to take it with a little bit of a grain of salt, but they are going to work to your, they're going to try and work in your best interest. At the same time, they're never going to push too hard, because their relationship with the company is something they value more than placing one individual, because they're hoping to place multiple individuals. So if for some reason there's some snafu in the process, and they get into a place where they think placing you in the company is going to impact them in a negative way, they'll cut and run really quickly, because they care more about the relationship. Recruiters are an interesting thing. Sourcing tech talent is hard, and it's a lot of work. And when you're a middle manager or a director, and sometimes even as a VP, and you're sourcing talent, that's effectively a full-time job. I mean, that's what recruiters get paid to do full-time, right?
Right.
And when the market's tight like it is now, when there's not a lot of talent available on the market, it's even harder and it's even more work. So that can become almost a full-time job. At my current gig, I was told within my first week of being there that my top priority was hiring. So even though I was brought into a team that was in a little bit of disarray, and they wanted me to sort of get the team more productive and get the team more focused on their work, the top priority was hiring new people, because they were trying to grow the company and they were trying to bring more people in so that they could do more. That's where recruiters are very helpful. The big thing that they'll tell a hiring manager is that they will take a look at your job description. They'll sit down with you. They'll have a meeting with you, and you'll describe exactly the kind of person that you want, exactly the things that you want out of the recruiting effort. I want this specific skill. I want somebody who knows, Ansible. I want somebody who knows Chef. I want somebody who knows AWS, whatever it is, right? So you'll give them all those things, and you'll have a long conversation, half an hour. They'll buy you lunch because, they're hoping to make a ton of money off of you. And then they'll start sending you resumes. The good ones will actually listen to the conversation you had, and they'll send you resumes that match. The bad ones will just look for keywords, and they'll just fire off whatever happens to come into place. The funniest story, and this happened at the company that we worked together at, was when I got a resume. I was looking for somebody to be a platform manager, meaning a technical operations manager for the platform. And I got a resume from somebody who was looking for a job as a manager for an offshore drilling platform. And this did come from a recruiter. And
great.
I got the resume, and I'm looking at this thing, and my initial reaction is, what the fuck is this? I can't, how, I don't understand. And I'm looking through the whole resume thinking maybe somewhere in here he had some software experience.
Then
Nope.
He started programming.
He had 20 years of offshore drilling platform experience, and the title of the job was platform manager, and therefore I got sent this resume. So
A lot of repeat business.
yeah, needless to say, I didn't do much work with that particular recruiter anymore. If the recruiter needs to work on both ends of that equation. They need to provide me with a solid pipeline of good candidates, and then they need to work for those candidates to get them the compensation that the candidate is looking for, the position the candidate is looking for. But the thing to remember is that when you're working with a recruiter, that the recruiter is looking to get paid. And they will therefore, if they think that you will fit and get hired at a job, they'll put your name in front of that job, and then they will try to convince you that that's the right job for you. Yeah. So you still have to do your own due diligence and understand the position that you're talking about, and you have to do the work that's required to understand whether or not it's a company you want to work for, and actually meets the requirements that you set forth to the recruiter. Because you guys will have the same conversation with the recruiter, just from a slightly different tack. Like, I'm looking for a job in this geographic area. I'm looking for a job that pays this much. I'm looking for a senior position doing this. Yeah. And then the recruiter will take all of that and say, well, there's this job over here that, I think I can get him in the door, and then if the interview goes well, he'll get hired. It only meets one of those 5 criteria, right. But I think they might get hired because this company's really desperate to get somebody on board. Mm-hmm. So you do have to, just do your own research. And that's where sometimes the recruiters will be a little cagey when they provide you with the jobs. They might not tell you all of the details up front because they want you to have the conversation so that the hiring manager, me, can sell you on the position, which, is part of hiring.
So, every time I've worked with a recruiter, they send me, a list of jobs, and then I say, the ones that I'm interested in before they send my resume out to the company. Mm-hmm. So, how did an engineer of oil rigs think I could work for this company in Boston? Sure, please send my resume there.
So it
what?
It greatly depends upon the recruiter and the recruiting agency as to whether or not they even present that to you as a candidate. They're not necessarily going to do that. Sometimes they're just going to get resumes in, and they're going to look at the resume and say, oh, platform manager, oh, I got this opening over here, platform manager, let me send the resume over and see if I get a bite. So they may not even look at it. They're probably sending your resume to companies that you didn't even mention, and then if that company has interest, they'll push harder on you to try and convince you to go there. Because that company has expressed interest, and it's not it's smart, it's not a bad thing for them to do that. It's just that you as an individual contributor need to be aware of it and not fall for that hard sell. They're salespeople. They're selling you as a candidate to me as a hiring manager, and you need to be aware of what they're pushing, and just take that into consideration. They may, at times, that's going to work in your favor. Because you may end up saying, you know what, I will talk to that company. And then all of a sudden you have a conversation. It's like, oh, this is way more interesting than I thought it was
Right.
at first.
Yeah.
And that, that happens more often than you'd think.
Wow, that's so crazy.
I know that the industry is like insanely hot right now, like from the talent side, from the side that we and I think most of our listeners are on. So this question is one of those questions that's probably more interesting when the industry is skewed the other way. But what kind of things stand out, or maybe even stand out negatively, positively or negatively, when you are looking through that stack of 50 resumes that various recruiters and people send you?
So this is going to vary a little bit from manager to manager and from job to job. So I've done I've worked in a few different segments of the tech industry. So I've worked as a software manager, I've worked as a technical operations manager, and I've worked as a QA manager. Depending upon which of those things that I'm looking at resumes for, I have some very specific things that are major turnoffs. If I'm looking for QA in particular, but all three to a lesser extent, but you'd better not have a resume that's riddled with spelling errors. Spell check has been around for 20 damned years. Use it and really use it. And then when something pops up that you're not sure of, ask somebody. And this is something you can lean on your recruiter for as well. If your recruiter is looking at your resume and not pointing out these kind of errors, your recruiter's not doing their job.
One thing I got a lot of value out of is I was living in Europe, and it had been 5 years since I'd worked in the US, and I knew that the recruiter would update my resume and like move stuff around before sending it to whatever companies I was applying to.
Yep.
And I just asked them to send me a copy of the final one that they were sending out. And that was like a very useful learning experience for me.
Yes.
I never had that happen.
Really?
Yeah, and your resume is awful. I have a copy of your resume when you were interviewing. It was garbage.
Oh, maybe they changed it to be garbage. I'll show you the original one. You can tell me.
It was formatted awful. There was
Really?
tons of space between everything. It was 3 pages long. The margins were 2.5 inches on each side.
Yeah,
It was
Okay, that is not my doing. Okay, I take it back. Don't ask your recruiter to change anything.
yeah. So Jeff is hitting on some of the other things that are really irritating. Don't go back more than 10 years. I just don't care. If what you did 10 years ago versus what's happening in the industry today is completely irrelevant. The only time that might matter is if I'm hiring a manager, and I want to see that I want to see career progression at that point. Career progression is always good to see in a resume. Like you move from an individual contributor into a manager role and how that progression occurred. But in general, more than 10 years, forget it. It's just not something I ever want to see. If you hand me a resume with 4 pages that has 25 years of experience on it, it's not that I care about how old you are. It's really that I care about, I don't want to read 4 damn pages of stuff. And
Right.
what you did in 1995 is completely irrelevant to what's happening now. In 1995, I was working on ISDN technology. And you know what? ISDN is something no one gives a shit about, nor should they. So it's not on my resume.
But shouldn't you put that you worked at X company for so many years?
No.
Really?
Okay.
So you shouldn't even put that.
So how do you handle as you progress in your career? Let's say you've got a big name company on there kind of early on, maybe after the sort of fall off for the end of your resume or the beginning. What do you do?
Yeah. You can use your best judgment. If you worked for Microsoft, it went early in your career, it might be something I want to see. But in general, there comes a point when it's it is just simply not relevant. I did work on Windows 95. I don't think anybody cares about me, the fact that I did some work on Windows 95. I appreciate that you care, but honestly, no one else is going to care. That's a long time ago.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, you really, in general, 2 pages is the max. And if you can fit it into 1 page, that'd be great. A lot of people will say that they just want it to be 1 page. To be perfectly honest with you, I think, if you're applying for a senior position and you've only got 1 page in your resume, you're probably not really a senior engineer unless you spent a long time at one company.
Maybe that's what it was. My resume was only 1 page because I spent 8 years at my
That
first
cost
job.
you the senior title right there.
Damn it.
Fucking amateur, bro.
Well, like I said, if it's a long time at one place, then you can get away with 1 page
Right.
if you're applying for a senior position. But like there are people who are applying for senior positions today who've got 2 years of experience under their belt, and that's not uncommon. So you'd better show me if you're doing that. You'd better have some really interesting projects on your resume, and that's the other thing. Like, I'm less concerned about a list of technologies that you know. I expect that any recruiter that I'm working with, any hiring, any HR department that's working to help me source candidates is going to do that up front. So, I'm going to say I need this technology, and these other technologies would be decent substitutes for this technology. But if they don't have any of those, I don't have the time to train them to learn these things. So give me other candidates. So you should have some of that on your resume, just as part of it. But it really shouldn't be a laundry list of all of the operating systems, and all of the Linux distributions.
I think a lot of people
you
do
work
that
on.
when they don't go through recruiters and they only go through things like Indeed or those
Yeah.
those search engines. Then it becomes like keyword spamming.
Right.
Is an effective technique for getting
It
found.
it can be, but at the same time, then you get into situations where the platform manager is, so that's a double-edged sword. But when I do look at the resume, what I want to see is a narrative, and not a lot of people are good at the narrative on their resume. If you're applying for a senior position or greater, principal, architect, anything like that, I should be able to see the progression of your career, and I should see that the projects that you worked upon are relevant to the role that I'm trying to hire you into as your career progressed. So there should be a narrative on your resume as to how you grew into the role that you're working to apply for now. So you should really think about that when you do your resume. The other thing is that if you are if you're somebody who's been a team lead or a manager, I'd like to know how many people you've managed. Because sometimes having 30 direct reports means something very different than having 5 direct reports. And neither one of those is a big negative, but it greatly depends upon the role you're being hired into. Like if I'm hiring you to run a technical support group, having 30 direct reports, is relevant.
Mm-hmm.
If you had 30 direct reports as a manager or as a software group, that's way too damned many, and you should have been fighting against that from tooth and nail, because you can't handle 30 engineers in that type of role. So you have to go down those routes as well. You have to think about the narrative, think about how you're selling yourself to the person that you're to the company that you're trying to get into, and that's another piece. Like if the projects that you're highlighting have zero relevance to the work that I'm doing, then they're not going to be as compelling for me to bring you in to talk to you. So think about that when you put down the projects that you put in. The other thing that I would recommend to everybody is that people tend to update their resume when they think they're going to start looking for a job.
Mm-hmm.
Don't do that. Update your resume on a regular basis. Do it quarterly if you can, because then all of the projects that you worked on are still fresh in your mind, and the details on those projects are fresh in your mind. A lot of people use LinkedIn for that purpose. You can generate a resume from LinkedIn if you use that resource properly. Just every couple of months, just log into LinkedIn, update your profile with the stuff that you worked on most recently, and then that serves as a reminder when you actually do want to do your formal resume as to what you can highlight.
So then what do you suggest if you don't have a story? So looking for jobs, when I moved to Boston, I wasn't looking for junior level positions because I didn't feel like I was at the junior level position when I moved. But if you were looking for junior level positions, it seems like there's none out there. No one wants to spend the time teaching someone or trying to onboard someone, because onboarding takes long enough as it is. And if you're completely new, it probably doubles the time for that. So
Sure.
one, where do you find these like entry level jobs in your opinion, and then like how do you write a story when you're looking for your first job?
Okay, so those are two very different questions.
Right.
So, in general, if a company is hiring for entry level positions, they're sourcing from schools. That's
Like job career fair type things.
career fairs.
Some career fears.
Yeah, career fairs. My Boston accent really wants to come out there. Those types of environments, also just from internal resources at schools. Most schools have placement people, and if you're in college now and you're nearing graduation, you should be talking to these with the school people because they generally cultivate relationships with companies. And as companies go from sort of, depending upon the company's phase of development, if they're startups or if they're mid-level companies, they're going to have stronger relationships with schools. The bigger the company they are, the more likely they're going to have a relationship with the school. So companies like Amazon, Microsoft, Facebook really cultivate those relationships pretty heavily. And they develop internship programs, and most of those big companies have paid internship programs too. So when you're hiring for an entry-level position, you're hiring for a junior engineer, you're much less concerned about the narrative. They're like, there is no narrative. Like you're looking for information about the coursework they've done, the relevancy of that coursework that they've done. If they have a job history, that's nice. Usually what you're looking for is just the idea that somebody has worked somewhere for some length of time, and like even a summer job can be good to put on a resume if you have job experience.
Even if it's completely unrelated to tech.
Yeah, I mean, if you're talking entry level, we know that. Like, I mean, I understand that you're 16, you probably didn't work for Facebook.
Right.
But what if you're 20 and didn't go to college?
That's a lot tougher. That's a hard sell. Most of the time, I actually got into my tech job when I was still in college, my first tech job. And I did that by basically pointing out to a service provider local to me that they had a security hole. So, I just called them up. You called their tech support and let them know that they needed to patch. I'm going to really date myself. They needed to patch Finger on Sun OS. So this is before awesome. Solaris. So they had an older version of Finger that had a pretty significant security hole in it that allowed you to sort of grab the password file before Shadow was a thing. So it was a pretty significant problem. And I called them up and I let them know that they had that problem. And it was a really small internet service provider. And they said, "Hey, you want a job?" And I was like, "Sure, can I come in and talk to you?" That's actually not an unusual event. Like, what you need to do is you need to cultivate a network. So you need to go to the local events. Meetup, it's a thing. Go to Meetup and look up the area of technology that you're interested in. If you want to talk about games, there's a million games industry meetups in just about every major city. If you're interested in technical operations, AWS, cloud technology, containers, whatever it is, go to those meetups, meet the people, start talking to them, let them know that you understand the technology. And you can even be right up front, like I'm not going to college, I don't have a degree, but this is something I'm passionate about, it's something I know about, and then start talking about the tech. And they may say, "Hey, let's talk," because the reason hiring managers go to those things is to meet people who know the tech. And I, as a hiring manager, I don't really care if you went to MIT or if you went to, Bay State Community College, or if you just didn't go to college, if you know the tech. And that's what an interview process is supposed to elicit from the candidate, is whether or not they know it. The interview process is another problem, and it can be done very poorly and it can be done very well, and all the ranges in between, but that's what it's for. So if you don't have a college degree and you are looking to break into the industry, go to the events, and there's a lot of them, and a lot of them are free. Sometimes they're not. Get yourself a job at wherever you can, save up a little money, go to AWS reInvent. It's going to cost you a couple $1,000s. You might have to save up all year to get there, but once you get there, start talking to people. Everybody there is looking to hire somebody.
Yeah, everybody's desperate.
Yeah, because there's not enough talent out there, so we want to hire.
I've never been to a meetup or a conference or anything. So I have like when you say
There's
like,
some great meetups here.
when you say go to a meetup, I like literally have no idea what you would do there. I feel like I would walk in like the back door of our kitchen that we used to like work at, like the company we worked at, and then just stand there and just be like, "Hey, I'm here. What do I do now?"
Yeah, so I mean that's not a not uncommon problem, and I mean I suffer from that as well. A lot of people don't believe me when I tell them that I'm an introvert. Like I struggle to have to break into conversations with strangers. It's not something I'm good at.
I don't know if anyone's really good at that. I mean, I guess there's some people, but specifically in our world,
It's a lot less common.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, you're not the only one at that meetup feeling that way. And if you see somebody else who looks like you feel, go up to them and say hi.
yeah, and it really is just that. You just have to be a little bit bold, go in and break your way into a conversation. If seriously, just lurk and listen. And eventually, if you're passionate about the technology, hear something you know a little bit about, and break into the conversation. Hey, that's something I know a little bit about. And say exactly that. Just start talking about it.
People have been super friendly at all the meetups. And you can just think of it as, I mean, you get free beer and pizza at like a Microsoft office or a Google office. Like, when are you ever going to get in there?
Right.
Like, just go. It's a free entry to a cool place with really smart people.
You could fall ass backwards into it like I did.
Right.
But the other thing to remember about those types of events, particularly if they're sponsored by a company, is that the reason the company is sponsoring it is to find you.
They want to talk to
I guess that's true. Like the meetups that we had at the company we worked at were to like talk to people to hire them.
Right. So, and the people from the company who are there specifically and are required to, by the company, initiate conversation with people. And if they see somebody who's sitting in the background being a wallflower, go and talk to that person, because maybe that person is just a kind of shy, but they may be a rock star in hiding.
They're usually the case. Because I was going to say, when you don't have your narrative that you're talking about, like some of those, even now, I'm sure there's like tons of people in high school even and college that are like way smarter than I am.
Oh, that's definitely.
In the discipline that we all kind of work in too. So like I don't know what makes me better than them, other than that I've had a job for a while. Like, so why do I get the senior position when they don't? Like, so going back to like not having the story or not having a college degree, like there's definitely people that don't have those things that are much smarter.
It's cultivating a network, and that's a double-edged sword in our industry and in any industry, but particularly in tech. You hire the people you know, and because you've worked with them and you know that they're good.
Yeah.
So that means that it's hard to break into the industry for people who don't have that, and it actually leads to the lack of diversity in the industry as well, which is an entirely separate problem, but a big one.
Mm-hmm.
And that. There's a reason why it's often referred to as the old boys network, and it really is. There's a real problem with people, particularly as you advance in the industry. You tend to mentor people who are like you, as opposed to mentoring a more diverse group of people, and that makes that breaking in problem that much more difficult. And it makes advancement much more difficult, and it leads to a lot of isolation for people who are not white and male in tech. But it really is a very similar problem to the breaking into an industry when you have no experience.
Yeah.
But the cultivating a network helps a lot. And there are lots of resources out there, and there's good ones for, diversity and inclusion as well. So there's some really, really great groups. There's Women Who Code, which is one of my favorites. Mm-hmm. And there's any number of other ones, and you can sort of find them. And I'm sure Dave can put links to them in the notes. But those things, they are there explicitly to help people who may not have an easy way into the industry to get in, and that's the best way to do it when you don't have a strong resume and a strong narrative.
Yeah, interesting. So then, I don't know if you want to ask.
I've just got one closing question. But
yeah, go ahead. No. I was gonna switch kind of topics.
Oh, then go for it. Yeah.
I was gonna ask like what your story was. We talked about it a little bit.
Yeah,
Like-
maybe we'll put this part first.
Yeah,
I just
like
realized after 45 minutes you said what the kind of stuff you had worked on and what you actually did. And I was like,
Oh.
maybe we should.
yeah. So you like found the flaw and like that's how you like started your career. But
Sure.
like how like so what is your story from like start to like this huge
What's your progression?
What's my career
Chris.
progression? What's
Yeah.
my narrative, right?
Yeah.
That's going to determine
Oh,
how you
man,
get
Westworld.
hired around here.
So
Wrong podcast.
I know.
So, you know, I mean, I've been a computer nerd most of my life. You know, I actually kind of grew up in a economically disadvantaged environment. I grew up in public housing. My family didn't have any money, but my father took out a personal loan and bought a computer when I was, I don't know, let's see, 11, I think.
Wow.
Yeah, so he bought the original Mac, and he bought the 512K Mac, which was called the Fat Mac at the time.
Wow.
So this was
That's a ton of
128K.
memory.
Yeah, it was the 128K and the 512. So he got the Fat Mac, and he took out a personal loan, and I think it was $3,500, which this was 1984.
Yeah.
So that was a lot of money. But he felt that that was going to be something that would pay off for his family.
Wow.
And he was right. It did. And, you know, it's the barrier to entry is a little bit lower now, but it's still hard for people who don't have the, you know, economic advantage. But nowadays you can get a computer for a lot less money.
Yeah. I mean, do they still do one laptop per child? Is that still a
I don't know.
That's a good question.
yeah?
I think that's still doing well.
Because I remember that was a thing, and then the like netbook thing like
Right.
broke off because of that. They're like, oh, if we can make these cheap laptops, maybe we can make little ones. But I mean, you can get a Chromebook now for $150.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
it's much easier to get to do that. There's still the question of resources around learning how to do the things, right? For me, my father worked in like tech sales, and at one point he got a job selling Unix of all things.
Wow.
Like really, you know, like he worked for I think it was AT&T, and he was selling Unix. So he brought home a Unix System 5 Release 4 manual, like the actual physical manual, which I still have.
Wow.
Yeah. So he gave that to me, and we had a Mac. And so, you know, I basically kind of taught myself basic. And then the sort of where it really kind of came into focus for me was I had a disassembly program, and I had a copy of Rogue, which was one of the early video games. And so I loaded Rogue into the disassembly program and searched through it. I was also a D&D nerd, so I was looking through basically the assembly code and came across a section that had like 5D4, 6D8. And so it turns out that was the damage that was being done by all the monsters in the game. So I zeroed those out and was able to beat Rogue. So it turns out you can actually beat that game. You just have to cheat really badly.
Just become an assembly program.
Right. So I you know, it took a while to get through that, and then I was kind of hooked. I was like, oh, okay, so there's something I can do here. So, you know, I was heavily into computers for a long time as a kid, and I got to college, and that was when I discovered that the internet existed, which it kind of barely existed. The web didn't exist at that time. There was something called Archie and Usenet. Got into those.
Oh, Usenet.
Yeah, and I had a long conversation with my future wife about how the fact that the internet existed and it was going to be the biggest thing ever.
Yeah, sure, Chris. Whatever.
It's a true story. Angela?
Yeah, on a group, especially remember you talking about it at length on the car ride for Thanksgiving. After New Year.
So we had this long, I was like, there is so much, all the information in the world is there. People
With
talk
your
to each
printout of
other.
100 things to do to freak out your roommate.
So we had that. So went through all that. Was very excited about it. And when I left college, I lost internet access, and I was very unhappy about that. So I hunted down a local company that was an internet service provider called ShoreNet. They were originally called Eco Software, and there were 6 employees. I got a shell account, dial-up shell account, which was a 2400 baud modem, which I was super excited.
Lightning
I saved up big time at my job at Marshall's for that. And then Marshalls. Chez Marshalls. And so I got a shell account. I was messing around on Usenet. I was a big fan of alt-hack, and came across just an exploit for Finger in SunOS. And I was like, hey, my shell account is SunOS. Let me give this a try. And guess what? Totally worked. And I really liked my internet service provider, and I was very excited to have internet access, so I figured I'd give them a call. So I called them up, called their tech support person, who was this guy named Bill. And
Are you still friends with Bill?
I am still connected to Bill.
Bill gave me my first job too, and I'm still friends with him.
All right. Yeah, so I had I told Bill. Bill, it turns out, was originally a used car salesman who just happened to apply for the gig and got it. He knew nothing about Unix. He was just the tech support guy. And he said, hey, sounds like you know a lot about this. We're looking for people. Let me put you in contact with the guy who runs the company, this guy Lowell Gray. And so I talked to Lowell. Lowell invited me in. He said, hey, you know Unix? All right, let's talk. So he called me in to have an interview. And I was, I think, 22. Yeah, about 22. I was working construction at renovating the Marshalls that I used to work at. And so he brought me in, interviewed me, and offered me a job. And it was paid literally twice what I was making.
Awesome.
Yeah, so it was a pretty good job. I was working as sysadmin, systems administrator for SunOS. And I was employee number 7. We had, at the time, 300 dial-up customers for our shell account. I had also wormed my way into the Windows 95 beta at that point. So I was in the beta program, and I had told Lowell about this, and he said that he had heard about this new cool technology called PPP and slip. And so he asked me to see if I could get that hooked up under Windows 95. I figured it out, and the other sysadmin there installed the daemons that were required for it, and I did the Windows 95 work. We put together a software package that included an email client called Eudora, Eudora, and the other one was Mosaic, which was this newfangled thing called a web browser. For this new technology, and so we put together a floppy disk that had all that, and then had configuration for setting up Windows 95 TCP/IP stack. And so we sent that out as a mailer to our current customers, and then we went from 300 customers to over 30,000 customers in 2 years. Wow. And went from 7 people to 200 people in that same time frame.
That company is now known as Verizon. No.
they were purchased by a French telecom company at some point. So I worked there for a while. That was my first management gig, actually. I became a manager of the technical support department and had 30 people working for me. And then because of the work that I had done with Windows 95, I started working on Windows NT, which was a much more difficult nut to crack. And I learned some technology around, so it's, God, what's the name of the stupid software? I don't remember anymore. But it was a software that you use to preload Windows NT onto a purchased computer. And that technology could be used to configure the TCP/IP stack to work appropriately for this ISP. And so I was talking to a friend who said, hey, that's pretty much exactly what I do over here at NEC. And we need people to do that on laptops because no one sells a Windows NT laptop. And we want to do that. So they hired me away from ShoreNet, went and did that for a little while. That was where I did most of my development work. After that, did a startup where I ran myself and a partner created a software that was like a content management system primarily. And that failed when the bubble burst. And then finally I decided to go into QA just to make some money after that burst. Did that for a while. And because I had pretty much been in management for quite a while at that point, pretty rapidly the company that I was at asked me to be in management. So I took that gig. And I've kind of bounced around from mostly to startups, mostly mid-sized startups. And I did some work for Warner Brothers for a little while, working which is a much bigger company, working on video games. That was a lot of fun. Did some work on Mortal Kombat 10, Batman Arkham Knight. I did, what was the other one? Mad Max Fury Road, which was fun.
When does your NDA expire so you can give our listeners some
Insight.
codes, some cheat codes?
Cheat codes for those things. I don't know, actually. I wonder if I could. So there are some sort of hidden fatalities that, as of a year ago, I know had not been found in Mortal Kombat 10 yet. I don't know if that's still true. And I would have to look into that. And those folks would be very upset with me if I shared that information.
Well, so Mortal Kombat 10 is a PC game now, right?
Yeah.
So
I would imagine people have found it through the PC version.
Someone's probably written like a neural net to find every possible combination.
Yeah. I would imagine that stuff is out there at this point, but they work pretty hard to hide that information, and they work pretty hard to sort of to make it very difficult to do. So there was 4 or 5 of them as of a year ago that hadn't been discovered yet.
So then why even put them in the game?
Because they know that the games have long life cycles. Like, those games are designed to last for 10 years.
Right, but...
And there's like a personality type that will have fun exhausting every potential way of getting them.
And it's fun for the developers. The developers got to have fun too. My favorite story about working with... So I worked with this guy named Gavin, who was the lead developer for Mortal Kombat 10. And my favorite conversation when I was talking to him was... he'd been working on Mortal Kombat for 15 years. He'd been working for NetherRealm for a long time. And we were talking about the game, and I said, I played Mortal Kombat 1 when I was in college, I got okay at it. I mean, I could play against other people and win better than 50% of the time, right? So I was pretty decent at it. But I was terrible by the time I started working on Mortal Kombat 10. And so I asked Gavin. I said, "So Gavin, are you any good at it?" And he said, "Fuck no, I'm terrible at this game." And I was like, "But you're the lead developer." He said, "Yeah, but that doesn't mean I'm any good at it. No one who works there is any good at it." And I was like, "Not even the Boons?" No.
Wow.
So it's pretty funny. And for anybody who plays the game, there are, if you're one of the developers on the game, they pretty much they will associate your Xbox or your PS4, PSN accounts as developers of the game. So you have this sort of little tag, in the banner, I think, for when you log into the game as a developer. And if you get paired with somebody and that person beats you, there's you get an in-game asset that indicates that you have beaten one of the developers of the game. And I remember the first time that I fired the game up and I saw the tag, I was very excited. I was like, oh my God, I have the actual developer tag. And I could not get away from people who just wanted to kick my ass. And it was just this constant stream. I could barely get through the menuing system before I had a request to play. And every single time I jumped into play, I would get my ass handed to me, and they would be very excited by the fact that they now had this little achievement that was now unlocked because I'd beaten the developer of the game.
And then they revoked your developer access because too many people were getting were getting the reward.
I haven't actually checked to see if I still have that, but I do have a credit in the game, which is always fun.
Respectable.
And then I started working for the company we worked at together, and have since moved on to another company that I can't name.
But whose
and then
name
another
you
company
would recognize.
that you can't
Yes,
name.
you would definitely recognize the name of the other company. But
Yeah.
so
You made it, man.
yeah,
All
I'm
the way
doing
to the
all right.
top.
That's right. It's always fun, and there's a lot of interesting things that you do when you're in software management that you don't get exposed to as an individual developer. but it's not. A lot of people go into management thinking that all of a sudden they're going to have all the information and all the power, and you just don't.
Yep. So, because we talk, the people that are listening to this are mostly people that are either getting into the career or maybe evaluating it, or sort of in the career and looking to move up or crossover, looking for the next thing to specialize in.
Or they're furries. We have a lot of furries that listen to our podcast.
That has something to do with you being the host, Jeff. I don't know, that community sort of followed you over.
That explains that outfit, the blue thing that he came in that day.
Yeah.
I mean, I thought it was like a Dino Friday thing, but it turns out...
I don't actually have any pets. My bag is just covered in furry hair from my outfits.
Oh, I'm so glad I'm editing this one. We're going to have some very offended furries by the time we're done here. What?
Either that or Jeff's going to get a lot of instant messages.
Yeah.
Which is fine.
Jeff's going to get weird. Like, are you cheating now? No, these furs are just...
She's probably going to be like, thank God.
I always knew you were a Roadrunner kind of guy.
Anyway, I have no idea why there's no women in tech.
Right.
So, what advice would you give to somebody like that, especially early career people, in terms of kind of what topics are suddenly, I'm thinking things like DevOps, like cloud stuff. Where would you advise someone to become competent? What
Right.
stuff is important?
So, I mean, AWS is easily the best thing that you can dive into. It's
Really?
relatively cheap to get into. You can fire up a T2 Micro and pay, $10 a month.
Nothing for the first year.
Yeah, and that gives you the ability to learn an awful lot about how that system works. The more of the various services that you start to understand in AWS, the better off you're going to be. I strongly recommend people dive into container technology. Docker is the clear winner in that space, and you should dive into Docker. Kubernetes is probably the clear winner in orchestration technology, and that's not that difficult to learn.
Don't tell HashiCorp that.
It's very difficult to master. Actually, I think HashiCorp is kind of on board with Kubernetes at this point.
They're happy to integrate it.
But that does lead into the next one that I would mention is Terraform. Terraform is also something that
Amazing tool.
master Terraform, and there are going to be an awful lot of people who want to know about you and want to hire you. The other thing that I think is an undervalued thing to understand, particularly in the DevOps space, is continuous integration and continuous delivery.
I still struggle with that. Oh my God, it sucks. I hate doing it.
I mean, the two biggies in the marketplace there are Jenkins and GoCD. They both have good stories to tell, and they both have strengths and weaknesses. I would start in Jenkins just because they have a bigger part of the market. I think GoCD is a better tool personally, which sounds like Jeff might agree with. But it is, there are multiple avenues for a career if you know Jenkins. Like, there's release management, there's QA, there's DevOps, and even the software development folks, core software development folks are starting to dive into that tool chain as well. There are a lot of resources online for this kind of stuff. Dave over here has some pretty good tutorials on these things.
I don't know if he has.
I paid Chris $10 to say that.
No.
And I will take every $10 anyone offers to me.
Thanks, Chris.
You're welcome. Where's my $10? But seriously, there are an awful lot of really good resources for that. One of the things that I would suggest people take a look at is the awesome list. If you hunt for that, you're going to find it's a GitHub repository that is basically links to other GitHub repositories in hundreds of topics. And there are some really, really interesting ones out there, and it's a curated list. So it's crowdsourced and curated, and therefore most of the things that are in there are actually useful pieces of information. There are a lot of other good online resources, like stuff like Udemy, Pluralsight, which are relatively short money. they're hugely the value proposition there for something like that is huge. For $300, you have unlimited access to a massive corpus of very technical, very targeted, and very high quality learning resources. In some respects, I actually kind of like them better than taking courses above and beyond a computer science degree. Get a computer science degree, can't hurt. But if you want to go to school after that, I actually kind of recommend a more targeted technical course on specific topics rather than just going to take a further deeper dive into computer science unless you really want a master's degree. Those are really helpful, and these are the things that hiring managers are really looking for. We really want you to know these technologies today. Can't stress containers enough. That's the entire software as a service industry is headed in that direction. We will be containerizing pretty much everything.
Yeah, I hope you hear the desperation in his voice. He's practically clawing at the table right now.
It's impossible to find good people who know these things. If you know them, you're going to make a lot more money than you would ever believe.
And not containers like the Container Store. Don't walk into the mall, go to the Container Store, and start buying Tupperware.
But you might want to start studying offshore oil platforms. I hear they're lucrative.
There's a big market for that. The funny thing is that getting hired onto an offshore oil rig isn't that it pays a huge amount of money because no one really wants to live on an oil rig for 6 months at a time.
I guess it would depend on where it is. I certainly wouldn't want to do it off the shore of Boston.
How about Alaska?
I wouldn't want to do it there either. Because I think off the shore of Alaska is Russia. And
half the U.S. military.
Yeah.
Well, you'll be able to see it from your backyard. It'll be all right. But yeah, I mean, but right back at it, containers, seriously, no containers backwards and forwards, and you can almost just write your own salary and people will pay it. It's deeply needed. Obviously, mobile tech, and
you really think that the iPhone is going to last?
Yeah, iOS makes the most money across the market, both on the hardware and the software side. So you're better off doing your development in that arena than in
Swift.
Swift is whatever language you choose to use. There's a ton of them out there. Unity is actually a pretty good tool because it does give you the option to go across multiple platforms and into Android as well. But
and it's free.
It is free, but at the end of the day, the iOS marketplace is where people are going to make their money.
I feel like it's so saturated, though.
It is massively saturated, but it is a massive market, and that is just growing.
Yeah.
Everybody has a phone, and in this country and in most of Europe.
There's 5 phones on the desk here? And
Yep.
There's 3 of us. So, yeah.
Yeah. And, speaking of
the phone.
Yeah, and that area is only going to grow. Now, that stated, the Android side of things is less about the phone if you want to do development and more about embedded software and embedded firmware into devices other than phones.
Yeah.
Most of the devices most of the Internet of Things devices, which I have 50 or 60 of, most of this stuff is running some form of Android.
Yeah. I'm ready to wrap it up.
Yeah, I think that's all the time we have.
Yeah. Is there anything you want to promote?
Promote? No.
No, I mean your.
Chris has an Instagram account.
I
Yeah.
do. I have an Instagram
He doesn't want
account.
us to mention it, but we're going to mention it. Go.
Well, we have to
follow
write
him.
his little bio on our website.
Yeah.
So we have to put his Instagram account.
What's the Instagram account?
That Drinkstagram. That
That
Drinkstagram.
Instagram.
Yeah.
He makes delicious drinks.
I like cocktails, and it's a lot of fun to make them.
You could leave off tails also.
Yeah, I don't have any problem with that. Do you have a problem with it?
No,
I didn't think so.
I don't particularly like mine.
I mean, I'm going to say it's a minor achievement. We made it about an hour and a half without Jeff making a dick joke.
And you can cut this out too, so that's fine. Yeah.
Yep.
Well, thanks for talking to us, man. Thank you.
Yeah.
I feel like you imparted a lot of wisdom
Yeah.
that I think people are going to be pretty excited to hear about.
If people listen to it, if they're not still upset about the child porn episode we did.
Or watching Lil Tay.
Lil Tay, yeah.
It's all about Lil Tay.
I'm damaged permanently. Thank you, Jeff, for pointing out Lil Tay.
You
Hey, man.
turned that video off quicker than anyone else I've seen, and for that I applaud you.
I don't need to see another train wreck. You know? And
Child
that
stars.
poor little kid is a train wreck, and I actually feel bad for her.
I don't.
I do.
It was awesome.
Jeff's not tripped up by these morals you speak
Yeah.
of.
So we should help you put your 100-pound base
let's do it.
on the roof and then
Let's do it.
go home.
All right,
All right.
we'll see you in the next one, guys.
Bye everyone.